Hello, this is John Adams, and this is part 4 of our Introduction to Adobe Photoshop for Beginners. In this tutorial, we're going to continue working on the rubber ducky on the water background and adding some shadows to it to make it look like he belongs sitting in the water. So this is a little tricky. Sometimes it works out really great, sometimes it doesn't. So you just have to work with it as you go, and different images work differently. So on this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and add a shadow on the water layer, and we'll see what we can do with that. Oh, the other thing that we didn't really talk about is duplicating our images. So typically, if you have your rubber ducky already placed in here, it's still in the copy block. So if you want to add additional duckies and baby duckies, normally all you have to do is go into edit and paste, and it will paste the rubber duck in there again. Or you can go in here if you've done something else past that and you don't still have it in the copy block, which you should. You can hold the command key down, click on the actual rubber ducky, and it'll go back to that selection. You can go under edit, copy, and then you can go ahead and paste another one if you want to. And what it does when you do this is it pastes it right directly behind it, so you can see how they line up here. So all you have to do is use the move tool and move it out, and then scale it down, move it to the back a little bit, and then I'm going to move my layers over to this side so you can see what I'm doing in here. Now if I put this over the top, it's going to go over the top, but if I put it I have to make sure that I commit my sizing on it first, and then if I go ahead in the layers palette, what I can do is I can move this behind the other rubber ducky, and that way I'll get this overlap. So slight little overlap. The other thing that you can do too is you can hold your option key down, click and drag. I'm holding the shift key down too also, because if you don't, it'll move it in a different direction. You don't need to on this. If you hold the shift key down, it'll constrain it to horizontal, vertical, or it will go 45 degrees. So I'm just going to pull one down without using the shift key, and we'll create another one a little bit, maybe a little bit bigger here. And then we can create another one over here. Just make sure you commit your sizing up at the top. We'll go ahead and click on this one. So now you can see how that it auto selects the layer that you're clicking on. And you can hold the option key down, and then I did not hold it down first. You have to make sure you get it, otherwise it won't duplicate like this. And I'm going to create another one back here in the very back. We'll make this one a little smaller because it's further away, and we'll get that kind of effect. Okay, so now we have a whole family of duckies. So you can name this ducky 2. We'll name this, this one is the far back one, so I'll move that down in the layer. So we'll name this ducky 3, and then we'll name this ducky 4. So you can have 4 different duckies in here. So I'm going to turn these off, just get them out of the way, because we're going to work with shadows on this first, and we can discuss how to handle this later. I may want to get rid of these layers eventually. So I'm going to put our layers palette back over here, panel, and then I'm going to go ahead and put some shadows in underneath the ducky on the water. So I'm going to go to the water layer, that's the background, and then I want to create a new layer, so I go back down here, and when I do this, it's going to create a layer above it, unless you hold the command key down, and then it will, or a control key, it will create a layer below it. So I put the layer below it, and this is going to be ducky 1 water shadow. Or you can say number 1 water shadow, however you want to do it. So on this one, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to pick a color. So we'll go ahead, pick the paintbrush first, and then we'll pick a color. I'm going to move this over slightly. we'll pick another color, and then I'll pick from the dark colors that are in here. So I'm going to move this over so I can see some of the dark blue colors. So we're going to pick a dark blue color, and it probably needs to be a little bit darker than that. So I'm just shifting down slightly. So we're not off on the color range, but we're just getting a little darker. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then on here I want my brush to be larger, so I'm going to use the right bracket to make it larger, and I'm going to paint in here. Now I left this at 12%, that's why it's not showing up very strong, but I do want it to show up slightly, and you can see that I'm darkening this area quite a bit. And I might want to lower this opacity quite a bit, and like there we go. Now that looks nice. I want to get it a little darker down here along the ducky, and usually what happens is this will get cut off slightly, or it'll be a lot darker. So we may even want to add a little blue on the rubber ducky, because it'll compensate where the water goes over the edge. So right about in here, water will go over the edge. But first I want to make this blue a little darker, and I want to make my brush a little smaller. Left bracket, and I'm going to go around the edge here, and then I want it even darker than that, so I'm going to go even darker, and we're going to, and you can see how it gets darker. It's going to add up here. Okay, so it looks like it's sitting in the water a little bit better than it did before. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and then lower the opacity way down, and then get a little bit in here. Now I could have started with this darker brush too if I wanted to, but that looks pretty good. So one of the things we need to do is add a little bit of blue on the rubber ducky too. So I'm going to go back to the rubber ducky layer, or I can go to the move tool and click on the rubber ducky number 1. And then on this layer, I'm going to create another layer above it that I'm going to add the blue to. So I'll show you how this works. We'll call this duck 1 water. And maybe I should have named these differently, but I'll call this water shadow 2. Maybe I'll just take out the ducky 1 on here. The other thing you can do is you can move these layers so they go together, and then you can always create a group for them all to go into, so they stay in one grouped folder. So I'll show you how to do that later in another tutorial. If I have time today, I will. So duck 1 shadow layer, we have that, and I have the blue color in here, and I'm going to go back to a lighter shade of blue. So if I click on the foreground color in the color palette, or for the toolbox to get to the color palette, I'm going to go to a lighter shade. I'm going to go in here and pick a lighter shade, and then we're going to say OK. I'm going to go ahead and go to the paintbrush. I'm going to lower the opacity, is actually still low, so that's good. And what I want to do too is I want to go back to, I'm going to just paint this on the rubber ducky, not below it. So I could go over the edge and you probably wouldn't notice the difference. Let's try that first, because what it could do is I could go back to the command key, click on the icon for the actual rubber ducky, and use that on this shadow layer if I want to, and that way it would only stay in this specific area. So you can see I'm just adding the blue in here, and you can't really tell that's blue very much, but I would probably have to go to another darker color. I thought that would be too dark, but it doesn't look that bad. So you can see it almost has a little bit of a blue tinge to it, and I think I need to even go darker. So let's try that. And of course I have the opacity down to 10, so I may want to increase that up a little bit more and get this to have more of a blue tinge to it. And it's starting to do that, but let's even get it a little darker and add it down here. And it's starting to have that kind of look where it's sitting in there, and we could even make this even darker. And we want to make sure that I don't want the brush to be that big, but I want to darken it down here on the very bottom. So It's starting to look a little bit darker, and I may want to move this up slightly. And it's starting to look a little bit better. So let's go ahead and do this. Now, there's a couple things that you can do too on the modes up here. You have layer modes, and this is in normal layer mode. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect this. And then I'm going to change the mode. So in the mode, you have all these different modes. So you can say darken, which will darken whatever's below that on the layer. You can say multiply, soft overlay. So you can get different effects by what you do. So here's hard light, which is closer to what we were trying to do. And the other thing that we may want to do on here too is we may want to show a little bit, take off a little bit of this rubber ducky so he looks like he's sitting there. But I think that's good enough for now. A lot of times you can't see the whole bottom edge, or the bottom edge is kind of very unsmooth. It's not a very smooth. Right now it looks like it's cut out. So we may want to do something to that. Now you could use your eraser to do this and use your eraser, but you're not going to be able to get this back unless you go back in the history. So if I use the eraser, I need to make sure I'm in the soft edge eraser. And if I go down here on the rubber ducky itself, I'm painting in here, but I have this set pretty low, the opacity on the eraser. So you can see, I don't know if you can see that at all, but it seems to be, I'm painting on the area, so I'm actually losing a little bit of this. So that's what you can see without this color on here. And what we may want to do is just open. It looked a little bit too orangey on here, and I didn't notice that we had this on the very top. So this could go underneath here, which would make it look correct. It would look terrible. So we could have done this on one layer and just done the whole thing all at one time. So let's turn these off, and you can see where we painted down below because I took off some of the shadow. So let's go back in the history. I don't want to erase all that. So we'll go back in the history, and then we'll turn these layers off, and you can see this. Now if I did this one more time, I'm going to do this because we did this in two different steps. So we did the color here, which looks great, but this part in here needs to be a little bit darker. And what we did is we put it below this one. So when you put it on there, we see the orange, reddish brown color on top of the blue, and you don't see it as strong as we want. So we're going to go ahead and move this layer up above this duck 1 shadow. And we're going to go ahead, and one of the nice things about Photoshop that you can do is you can use your opacity for that specific layer. You can also use your modes too, but one of the things you can do is lower your opacity. So you can use your slider by adjusting the opacity of that layer, or you can go up here and scrub to the left or right, either more or less, so you can get the same effect. So in that way we can get this effect that it's sitting better in the water. So the other thing we can do is you can actually move this down. Possibly that may make it shift a little bit better. So I'm just using the arrow keys. Now that's not going to work because of the fact that it's overlapping too much. So I'm going to put it back where it was. But that's one of the things. You could get rid of that excess where it overlaps also. But that's just one way of making modifications. You can move layers, you can do opacity, you can do all kinds of different things. So the other thing that I like to do is put in a little bit of a shadow in the water. So let's go ahead and create one more layer. We'll go back to the blue color in here, and we'll go a little bit darker. And then what we can do is we can actually use the paintbrush, and we'll lower the size of the brush itself, and we can actually put in some rings indicating where the ripples would be. And now this looks a little funny, but it of course you have to have kind of a steady hand for this too. So of course I didn't get this perfect, but you can kind of see what it should look like. And you can go in here and erase too when you're actually doing this, or add more. So this would probably go underneath the rubber ducky, because otherwise if you saw it above, you would see where it overlaps, like in here. So you could see that. So I'm going to go ahead and put it down below. And then if you want to, you can still go in here and erase if you don't like what it looks like or how I drew this. You can minimize this a little bit and make it look a little bit better if you would like to clear it up. But it probably won't make much difference, because what we're going to do is we're going to lower the opacity of this and see how that looks. And what it's going to do is it's going to give it this kind of ripply effect. Now you can change the modes on this, where it would be darkened, usually pretty much the same as normal, but we're going to go ahead and change this to, let's see, multiply. And multiply is going to make it look a little darker, so we may want to lighten this up slightly. You get that kind of ripple effect. And if we zoom out on this, we'll see it looks pretty good. It's a little bit too dark in here, so we may need to modify this shadow layer, because the shadow layer looks too much. And I think I'll go back to what we were doing previously, and we'll get in a little closer here, and I will go ahead and actually move this down, and then we'll get rid of the excess on here, and I'll show you how we can get rid of the excess. So I'm just going to lower this down so it looks like it's a little closer to the edge of the duck. That looks a lot better right there, and I should have started a little bit lower. But what we can do to get rid of this area, it's kind of a tricky thing. You can go in here with the eraser and erase it, but you're never going to get it perfect. So what you can do is go back to your selection on your ducky layer and just click on this. Okay, now we have the duck selected, but we want the background selected. So all we have to do is go into the menu under select, inverse, and now we have the background layer. And if we're on this layer, when we have that set, all we have to do is hit the delete key on your keyboard, and it'll get rid of everything in the background on this layer, which there's nothing else on here except for this blue color, because you can see it right here. So if I hit delete right now, you'll see I'll get rid of that. I'll deselect, and then we'll go ahead and zoom out, and you can see that looks a lot better. Now we could put highlights in here too, so we could go in here and we could have another layer of highlights. So this is just one way of dealing with it. We could actually even use the dodge tool to or the burn tool to add some more lightness in here if we want to, but I don't want to paint on the actual layer, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new layer in here, and then I'm going to use the paintbrush, and I'll pick a specific, a brighter kind of highlight color, and it would have to be kind of in this range. So I'll pick a lighter. I'll go a little darker at first, and then we'll go ahead and we will add some lightness in here. You can see and this may or may not work really super well, but you kind of get the idea of how that's working. And we'll go ahead and lower the opacity of this, and it'll give you a better idea. Now that could be on normal, it could be on lighten, it could, all these others can be set. So let's try there's screen. Okay, and that even looks better. So I could go back to my paintbrush now and add a little more paint in here if I want to, and lighten certain areas, and just lightly paint in here. You can see I'm affecting this. It could be a little lighter. And so we get it pretty nice. So that's not a bad composite image. So I think it came out pretty well. And so those are some of the tricks of the trade. And don't forget to layer or name your layer. I'll say duck 1 highlight layer. Okay, and then we're at an ending point for this part 4. And part 4 of our tutorial, we went over adding shadows, deleting specific areas, moving layers, naming layers, and then we still have all these other little rubber duckies we can do that with. But one of the things we can do is I'm going to, instead of just pasting them in here like they are right now, I'm going to go ahead and we'll get rid of these, delete those, and just leave it like this. And what we can do is we can combine all these layers together if we want to, and into one layer by going under image, layer, merge layers, or merge down. It'll merge these all together. So if you select specific layers like this and go to image, merge, and I think that's all we want to merge together. Oops, under layer, merge layers. It'll merge all those layers into one, so you have one, and then you can duplicate this if you want to. So what we can do is drag it down into the new layer icon, and what it does is it duplicates it, and then we can drag it off to the side, and then we can, after we drag it off to the side, we can go ahead and size this with your move tool just by holding the shift key down, going to the corner, sizing it down, getting it to a good size, moving it over, also putting it behind or down below the other layer. Just by, you have to commit this first. It won't let me drag until I commit the sizing, and then drag it underneath. And now when we drag it underneath, there normally would be some little highlights in here, and you can see a few still in here that came over from the other highlights and shadows, and we would go in here and click on the layer that has those, and we would use either the erase tool, or we would use masking to do this, and later on we'll discuss masking and how to use masking. So for right now we're just going to use the erase tool. We want to have a hard edge on this because of the fact that we want to get really close without affecting the other object next to it. And soft edge, you'll actually affect the tail end of the rubber ducky there without even knowing about it until it's too late. So we'll zoom in, get close, and then we'll erase any little areas in here that will be affected by it. And you may want to lower or reduce the size of your brush so you can see a little bit better. And you can go in here and clean this up, and I made a little bit of a goof up here, so I can go back in my history if I want to and undo that by going step by step. And I'm going to go back in here and get rid of this, and you can see now I'm going to make our brush a little bigger and get rid of any of these other areas in here. I'll zoom out, and you can see I have some here too that I need to get rid of. Okay, and then notice I have this edge. It looks pretty good except for this edge right here that's created from the second rubber ducky. So I want to call this rubber ducky, or ducky 2, and I'll just call that ducky 2, and this one. So make sure that you manage your files and keep everything up to date so we know. So that's 1, that's 2. Now let's see if we have any more. Oh, there's a little bit of a highlight still in here, so we need to make sure that we, still in the eraser, that we can get rid of all this too. Now you can see that because when you turn this on and off, you'll see that on there. So I think I got everything. Okay, and then we're going to clean up this little edge by going to ducky number 2. We'll go to the eraser tool, lower the opacity on this, and then slightly affect this. Now this one we'd want to use the soft edge brush. So when we go in here, we want to right click and we use the soft edge on here, and then when we use the soft edge, you won't notice this as much, and it'll be very subtle when you make it. And I'm clicking multiple times to get rid of this little edge, and you can get rid of any other areas that you know are on this part of the image. So there's a little dark spot here, and I think that looks pretty darn good. So for this part of the tutorial, I think that's about it. That's real basic compositing, creating shadows, merging layers together we did today, creating deleting edges of shadows, creating highlights and shadows, creating little ripples in the water, and so on. So I think we've actually cleaned these up pretty well and created a really nice little image. If you kind of see it from a distance, it's not bad. It's not perfect. We could take more time and do this better. So stay tuned for part 5 of Introduction to Photoshop for Beginners. Thank you.